Welcome everyone. You are listening to the account with a news summary for day 387 of the war in Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in. Arguably, the biggest news today was the International Criminal Court in The Hague issuing an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. We will take a look at the updates here in a special segment. I also have a segment regarding Russia's drone attack on Ukraine this evening. Otherwise, there were only a few updates today. All updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, including an update on the Chinese commercial UAV that was shot down in Ukraine, the occupied territories, with an article about Russian soldiers mining everything while retreating, Russia and Belarus, containing updates on the Reaper drone incident and the profit plunge of Gazprom, and the international developments, with an update on Türkiye ratifying Finland's Nato membership. But first, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Attacks in and around Bakhmut continue, however no major Russian advance has been reported today as well. It does seem that Russia's offensive has slowed down and is at a standstill currently. We will have to wait and see which side will pick up the pace and gain the upper hand. It was reported today that journalists have been moved from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar. No reason was given. NATO estimates that Russia loses 1,500 soldiers in the fights in Ukraine daily, but mostly in Bakhmut. This number includes both killed and injured members of personnel. The commander of the ground forces of Ukraine, Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, stated today that Russia has gone all in for the Battle of Bakhmut. Avdiivka. Russian channels gleefully reported that Ukrainian channels mark Krasnohorivka as captured by Russia. However, we still have to see any official statement or evidence. I'm not disputing that the settlement is captured, but I find it odd that Russian channels rely on Ukrainian ones instead of publishing evidence. There were reports of positional battles in or around Krasnohorivka. Not sure what that exactly means. However, there was no attack reported on Stepova today. Russian troops have conducted 4 airstrikes on the city of Avdiivka in Donetsk Oblast, causing no casualties but destroying a residential building. And to start the news segment, let us take a look at the historical decision by the International Criminal Court. While many will argue the ICC has no authority, this is arguably one of the most symbolic gestures of the war so far. Judges at the International Criminal Court have issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova. Putin and Lvova-Belova are suspected of committing the war crime of illegal deportation of children from the occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation, which has been taking place since at least February 24, 2022. The article by the Kyiv Independent has links to many further articles and details. Maria Zakharova, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, stated that the decision of the International Criminal Court have no significance for Russia, in particular from a legal point of view. Russia withdrew from the ICC in 2016 following its criticism of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and Andriy Kostin, Prosecutor General of Ukraine, welcomed the news. This is the historical decision which marks the beginning of historical responsibility. The wheels of justice are turning. This is a clear signal to the whole world that the Russian regime is criminal and the criminals must be stopped, isolated and brought to justice. After the decision of the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin, the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Moscow will not be an easy task for Chinese diplomats, Alexei Danilov, National Security and Defense Council Secretary, believes. The Kremlin, meanwhile, called the arrest warrants null and void and argued Russia should issue arrest warrants for the judges instead. I am sure that the members of this tribunal themselves understand the absurdity of their steps, but neo-Nazis from the EU and NATO put pressure on them, and they are forced to make decisions that are null and void from a legal point of view. The chairman of the Russian Investigative Committee, Alexander Bastrykin, has ordered the committee to identify the judges involved in issuing the arrest warrants. According to Kevin Jon Heller, professor of international law at the University of Copenhagen, all members of the International Criminal Court are now legally required to detain the Russian President Vladimir Putin should he enter their countries. However, it might not happen at all. He said, "This is an incredibly important event. An incumbent head of state does not get accused by the International Court on a daily basis. But of course, the likelihood of Putin being detained in the near future is quite low." Now a quick update on the Russian drone attack on Ukraine. Air raid warnings were issued in some oblasts of Ukraine this evening. The Kyiv Regional Military Administration warned of a possible Shahed attack by Russia. Explosions were reported in Kyiv Oblast by the Kyiv Military Administration, in Dnipro by Suspilny News, and in Novomoskovsk, a town in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, by the mayor Serhiy Resnik. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. The Ukrainian military has shot down a Chinese-made Mugin 5 commercial UAV that can be purchased in China for about $15,000, which raises the question of the Russian military's access to such technologies. The Kyiv City Military Administration will reduce the curfew in the capital by 1 hour, most likely starting from March 26th, said the administration head Serhiy Popko. The government of Slovakia has approved the decision to transfer 13 MiG-29 fighter aircraft to Ukraine. The Cabinet of Ministers, meanwhile, approved the draft agreement needed for the transfer. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, stressed that Russian President Vladimir Putin is planning a global famine in the coming years, which is why it is so important to stop the aggressor country's regime as soon as possible. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. When forced to retreat from their positions, Russian forces plant mines across the territory of the land they withdraw from and rig various household objects, including gadgets with explosives. Petro Andrioschenko, an advisor to the Mariupol mayor, reported today that 103 people were able to leave occupied Mariupol and travel to government-controlled Ukraine or Europe. A large explosion was reported in Perevalne, Simferopol district in temporarily occupied Crimea, where the 126th Separate Guards Coastal Defense Brigade of the Black Sea Fleet is stationed. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has decorated the Su-27 pilots who caused an American MQ-9 Reaper drone to crash over the Black Sea. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, stated that the Reaper drone allegedly was over a part of Russian territory to which our sovereignty extends. He went on, saying that Americans are completely out of their minds, that there was no need to stand on ceremony with them, and threatened Senator Graham, saying, "Especially against the backdrop of statements by American bastards like Senator Graham that it is necessary to shoot down Russian planes. By the way, aviation accidents sometimes happen with such creatures." Dmitry Peskov, press secretary of the Russian president, has said that the decision of the Ukrainian authorities not to extend the lease of the Kyiv Monestary with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate confirms the correctness of the special operation in Ukraine. Chinese President Xi Jinping will travel to Russia next week for an official state visit. Gazprom's profits plunged in 2022. The net profit of Russia's main energy company amounted to only 747.246 billion rubles in 2022. Profits in 2021 were 3 times higher at 2.684 trillion rubles. A cemetery has been discovered in the Sverdlovsk Oblast of Russia, where at least 67 Wagnerites were recently buried, including those who should be serving their sentences in prison. In addition, the BBC reports that based on open sources, it was possible to identify the names of 17,375 Russian soldiers who died in Ukraine. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Belgium will hand over 240 Volvo military trucks to Ukraine, with the first batch to be sent as early as next week. The US has deployed the RQ-4 Global Hawk drone with the call sign 4-10 over the waters of the Black Sea. According to the German newspaper Handelsblatt, on March 23rd, at the European Union summit, the issue of providing Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells by the end of 2023 will be considered. Meanwhile, a high-ranking EU official has confirmed that several member states will likely sign an agreement on March 20th to provide Ukraine with 155mm artillery shells. Türkiye's President Recep Erdogan announced that his country will ratify the protocol on Finland's NATO accession. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. In recent days, Russian and Wagner Group forces have obtained footholds west of the Bakhmutka River in the center of the contested Donbas town of Bakhmut. Over the preceding week, the river had marked the front line. Ukrainian armed forces continue to defend the west of the town. However, more broadly across the front line, Russia is conducting some of the lowest rates of local offensive action that has been seen since at least January 2023. This is most likely because Russian forces have temporarily depleted the deployed formation's combat power to such an extent that even local offensive actions are not currently sustainable. Russian leaders will likely seek to regenerate the offensive potential of the force once personnel and munition stocks are replenished. In the meantime, commanders will likely be forced to choose between carrying out offensive operations and conducting a credible defense of the full line. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War, which today is a bit lengthy. The Institute stated that Prigozhin's press service published a claimed request for comment from a Russian news outlet, asking if Prigozhin was aware of alleged discussions between Putin and Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev regarding the future of the Wagner Group. The press service comment claims that the information on these discussions has recently circulated on Russian and Ukrainian Telegram channels and alleges that Patrushev suggested to Putin that there will be nothing left of Wagner in 1.5 to 2 months. The Post claims that Patrushev suggested that upon Wagner's destruction in Ukraine, Prigozhin will try to unite the former and remaining active Wagner fighters under a far-fetched pretext, arm them, and send them to the territory of Russia to seize power in the regions bordering Ukraine with a possible advance inland. The Post concludes that Patrushev has already ordered observation and control over the movement of former Wagner fighters, and that Putin reportedly agreed with this step and thanked Patrushev for his efforts to neutralizing Wagner in general and Yevgeny Prigozhin in particular. The lack of external confirmation on this subject suggests that Prigozhin has fabricated the alleged plot to further several information operations on behalf of Wagner and his own reputation, the researcher said. The analysts further stated that the Russian Federation will lose its influence in the post-Soviet countries due to a full-scale war against Ukraine. As noted, Russia's redeployment of elements of its peacekeeping forces from Nagorno-Karabakh to Ukraine undermines Russia's influence on Armenia. Russian peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh are most likely understaffed. In March 2022, the Russian military redeployed units of the 15th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, Russia's only specialized peacekeeping brigade, from Nagorno-Karabakh to Ukraine. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that as of June 2022, Ukrainian troops had killed about 800 and wounded about 400 soldiers out of 1,800 soldiers of 15 separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigades who were transferred to Ukraine. Russia will most likely lose military influence in other post-Soviet states as Moscow has transferred parts of its permanently deployed troops from Russian bases in Kyrgyzstan, occupied Georgia, and Tajikistan to conduct hostilities in Ukraine, the institute said. Other topics assessed today were: the Russian Federal State Security Service, FSB, appears to be trying to penetrate the Russian Defense Industrial Base, DIB, in a way that is reminiscent of the KGB's involvement with the Soviet military establishment. Western news agencies confirmed on March 16th that Chinese companies have sold rifles, drone parts, and equipment that could be used for military purposes to unidentified Russian entities. Such Chinese shipments are significant, however, because they could elevate strain on the overextended Russian Defense Industrial Base, DIB, and circumvent Western attempts to limit Russian access to microchips. Syrian President Bashar Assad used a staged interview with Russian outlet RIA Novosti to amplify notable Russian information operations. Polish President Andrzej Duda stated on March 16th that Poland will give Ukraine 4 MiG-29 fighter jets. Russian President Vladimir Putin attempted to reassure the Russian public that the war in Ukraine will not have significant long-term economic consequences, likely as part of the Kremlin's effort to prepare Russians for a protracted war. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The level of missile threat remains high throughout the territory of Ukraine. The enemy unsuccessfully tried to break through the defenses of our troops in the Kupiansk and Liman directions. The occupiers unsuccessfully tried to advance in the direction of Avdiivka, Verkhnokamianske, and Spirne. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy does not stop trying to capture the city of Bakhmut, where constant positional battles continue. At the same time, our defenders repelled enemy attacks in the areas of Klishchivka and Ivanivske settlements. In the Avdiivka, Marinka, and Shakhtarske directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the direction of the settlements of Kamianka, Nevelske, Avdiivka, Marinka of the Donetsk Oblast. The enemy is defending in the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions. In the city of Svatove, Luhansk Oblast, in one of the buildings located in the eastern part of the city, there is a new hospital for the occupiers. Currently, there are about 30 seriously wounded soldiers of the Russian Federation who were brought there during the last 2 days. In general, there is an increase in the number of seriously wounded Russian soldiers. Evacuation flights to the territory of Russia have increased from 2 to 3 per week. Local residents who have at least some medical education are involved in the care of the wounded. The Russian occupiers, with the active support of local collaborators, are increasing the number of torture chambers in the temporarily occupied and captured territories of Ukraine. Thus, a newly created torture chamber was spotted in the southeastern part of Enerhodar, Zaporizhia Oblast. There, citizens with pro-Ukrainian views, as well as those who do not want to comply with the demands of the local occupying so-called authorities, are brutally tortured. And with that, today's report is finished. If you are interested in any of the articles I mentioned, you can find links to them in the description if you want to read up on the details. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You are listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.